This happened to me when I was roughly 4 years old. Not super creepy, but it certainly contributed to my poor mother's fear of men, and consequently the one she instilled in me. When I was a kid, there was company in my neighborhood that would drive around door to door and sell frozen meals and meat for relatively inexpensive prices. Given the fact that my neighborhood was preoccupied by parents with young children and the elderly, this service was quite popular, and my busy mom was just as much of a fan as the rest of the cul-de-sac. A few alternating people generally circled around weekly, and I remember them decently well, since my twin sister and I were very friendly and rushed to the door anytime there was a visitor. There was a very straightforward but kind woman who just wanted to get her job done. A sweet young man who adored our terrier, and a man roughly in his 40s who was generally very outgoing and talkative. This story is centered on the last person. I don't recall this guy's name, nor does it matter for the sake of this story, so I'll just call him CDG, or Creepy Delivery Guy. Like I previously stated, CDG was a friendly guy and outwardly quite normal. A clean-shaven, articulate guy who loved to talk about his daughter for minutes on end, who was about my age. He talked to my sister and I plenty while at the door. Even so, my mom still got a weird feeling from him, but dismissed them solely because he hadn't done anything to warrant concern. After a few rounds in our neighborhood, he asked my mother if he could use the restroom in a polite manner because his shift had been quite long. She hesitantly agreed and he thanked her, then returned after an abnormally long time and gave us our order. After this, the shifts no longer alternated, and it was just CDG who delivered in our neighborhood. He requested to use the restroom every single time he delivered, and eventually didn't even bother explaining. Allow me to restate that he took an unusually long time in the bathroom. For my mom, the feelings of discomfort were intensifying, but she was much too polite. The turning point, however, was when, while in our kitchen, CDG described to our mother how his daughter had gotten an infection in her vagina because she hadn't wiped properly after pooping and had wiped back to front. He turned towards us and smiled wide, though still talking to my mom, and requested that he could show my sister and I how to wipe properly so it didn't happen to us. My mom said no. What a shock. After that, she didn't answer the door when he came around, and whenever we saw him driving the truck in the neighborhood, CDG would glare at us. We later discovered through word of mouth that he was unmarried and didn't have any children. I used to, and still occasionally do, work as a food delivery driver for my dad's Thai food restaurant. If I can remember correctly, the night I'm about to describe happened no more than a year ago, but I can't be sure of the date or even the season it was in. The restaurant I delivered for is very popular, but only to a smaller crowd, in the surrounding average-sized 2 or 3 towns. It was Thursday, and the number of deliveries on a Thursday night was always very small. I had a delivery to a house about 5 miles away, on this deeply wooded back road which I had delivered to before. The road was so dark at night that when you turned your headlights off driving down it, you were blind. There was not a streetlight for at least a couple of miles, and the house I needed to bring this food to had to be the most secluded house in the whole town. Not secluded as in no neighbors or buildings around it secluded, but secluded as in no one can be living there secluded. When I started driving there, the sun was about to start setting. The food was in the back, everything was normal, and I was listening to music. The 5-mile drive was quick, but when I got there, I noticed the receipt on the bag of food I was supposed to deliver read the number of a house that didn't exist on that road. The number was pretty similar to the house I had in mind, the secluded, abandoned-looking house that I had delivered to before. I assumed that the phone girl must have written the wrong number at the front desk because she did that a lot, and I know this was the house that called. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the sun was at the point of setting, probably 10 or so minutes until it got terrifyingly dark to be in the middle of the woods. There was still some light left, and I had the headlights on bright, so it wasn't as creepy. I took the bag of food and went to the front door. Knocked a few times and waited about a minute. Knocked again and waited about 20 seconds. I decided to go to the back porch, since that's where everybody was when I delivered last time. Knocked loud. No answer. Figured maybe I do have the wrong house after all. So I went back to the car with the food and decided to call the phone number on the receipt. Dialed it up and let it ring. No answer. Then I decided to call my dad to ask him if I was at the wrong house, or if I was given the wrong phone number, because these people were obviously not home. I was the only car in the driveway. As I'm looking for my dad's contact number in my phone, a blocked caller comes across my screen. I answered my phone, not even feeling the slightest bit creeped out. Yet. I put the phone up to my ear. Hello? Hello, you just called me. Mike? Kid you not, in the deepest, weirdest, most authentic sounding voice I've ever heard. It was clearly a man on the other line with a distinctive accent like nothing anyone could just make up that I know. It was foreign. And there wasn't anyone I called recently. I'd been working for the past 2.5 hours. My name wouldn't be able to show up on someone's caller ID anyway, because I was on my mom's phone plan. Yes, did you order Thai food? I'm here now. No, I didn't. And they hung up. What the hell? Why doesn't this man want his food? What is going on? How could he know my name? Blocked number? Why? So I call my dad, sitting in the driveway, sun just about to set. He told me he would call them and call me back. I waited. He called me back really quick and told me that they would be right out to get their food. I was at the right house. I asked my dad, and I had even called the right number. The most normal-looking man walked outside the front door, and I gave him his food, only for him to pay and thank me in the most polite, normal-sounding, friendly accent and tone imaginable. This was not the guy on the phone. I got back in the car and put it into reverse. I drove back to the restaurant, the sky now pitch black. Every time I get a blocked call now, I won't pick up. This all took place quite a few years ago, when I was about 14 or 15. As a result, my role in this story is very passive, so forgive me for not doing something about this when I really should have. My family used to order food from Schwan. If you're not familiar, they're one of those companies with food catalogs that you can order from, and a delivery man with a freezer truck will deliver it to your door. We had the same delivery guy every time, so he and my mom struck up a bit of a repartee. They'd chat whenever he delivered the orders, sometimes for more than 5 minutes. I was usually on the couch, which is in the same room as the front door, when the deliveries came, so I heard the conversations. I didn't really pay much attention, but the guy struck me as a little strange. Not downright scary, but sort of off. I figured he was just socially awkward, or maybe had some very mild mental disorder. But something just made me not like him, so I avoided him as much as I could. One thing that struck me is when I'd walk past the hallway that led to the door, he'd always look past my mom and sort of watch me. It always seemed like more than a quick, reactionary glance to movement, but more of a steady look. As a result, I'd try to stay in place when he made his deliveries, because I didn't like him staring at me when I was in my pajamas. I also didn't like him looking inside my house like that, seeing which directions the hallway branched out into. I've always been a little paranoid, so I was mindful of that sort of thing. Time went on, and our financial situation got rough. We had to tighten our purse strings a little, so the delivery food had to go. Our last delivery came, and when the delivery man asked my mom if she'd like to place a new order, she declined. Of course, he tried to convince her to continue ordering, but any employee of any company will do that. So we thought nothing of it. Then the next week rolled around and he was back in the neighborhood doing his deliveries. He knocked on our door. Now here's where my memory gets fuzzy. Either my mom answered and told him no again, and he came back again the next week, at which point we didn't answer the door, or my mom didn't answer at all. I forget a bit how many times he knocked on our door on delivery day, probably in the 1 to 3 range. Nothing too large, but a bit pushy and excessive. One of those days, though, something strange happened. My mom and I heard the knock at the door and peeked out a window to confirm it was him. We were very quiet and weren't moving, so he wouldn't hear us inside. Because by this time, he was really stepping over a line and creeping us out. So here we are, standing down the hallway from the door, waiting for him to leave, when we hear the doorknob turn. Now thankfully, we had the door locked. But this guy just tried to enter our home uninvited, when either he thought we weren't home or knew we were home. My mom and I stared at each other in complete shock. The guy left briefly after that, and we were sure to watch him drive away, and made sure both our doors were locked for the rest of the day, just in case he came back. Thankfully, he didn't, and when the next week's delivery day rolled around, he left us alone. It doesn't end there, though. My mom then got a call that one of her credit cards had been frozen due to some suspicious charges. At this point, the recession hadn't fully hit yet, so we had multiple credit cards. The one that was frozen was one my mom didn't use for anything, except for Schwan. In hindsight, she noticed that once or twice, the delivery guy hadn't just swiped her credit card in his little machine in front of her. He had taken it to his truck, where she couldn't see him, and swiped it then. Why that didn't raise a red flag for her, I don't know. But clearly this creep had written down her credit card information. So since the only place she had used this card was with Schwan, she called the company and told them what was up. I think she might have also told them about how the guy tried to come in our house. They said they'd look into it. Soon we noticed that the Schwan truck was being driven by someone different, leading us to believe the creep had been fired. We breathed a little easier knowing he wasn't trolling our neighborhood on a weekly basis. At the time, I had a friend who worked at the local supermarket a few blocks from my house. One day she started telling me about this creepy new bread delivery guy at the store. Apparently, this guy was talking to the teenage, severely underage cashier girls inappropriately. My friend felt creeped out by him the moment he first spoke to her, so she was pretty cold and curt to him, so he left her alone. Instead, he started talking to one of her friends and co-workers, who was, mind you, no older than 16. He would talk to her for long times in uncomfortably familiar ways. Eventually, he started telling this teenage girl long stories about how he was cheating on his wife with a woman with a prosthetic leg, and how hot he thought her prosthetic was. The poor girl had no idea how to say fuck off, so she acted friendly to him, even though she would later tell my friend how much she hated him and how creepy he was. As I'm sure you can imagine, this whole story reminded me of my own story about a delivery creep, so I shared my own story, and we noticed the time he had been fired from Schwan seemed to run pretty close to when this new bread guy showed up. So I asked my friend to describe the guy, and you guessed it, it was none other than creepy Schwan guy. Soon enough, he was no longer the bread delivery guy for the grocery store, and I haven't heard anything about him since. But it really makes me shudder to think about how he preyed on my mom, who was only trying to be nice and friendly to him, not to mention what might have happened if we hadn't locked our door that day.